Well, we're really excited about the COP because it gives us a chance to see our colleagues from all over the world, to talk with environment ministers and NGO leaders. There's people from the private sector here to figure out how together we can meet the world's most pressing needs in addressing threats to biodiversity, which is what the whole conference is about.
Talking about your organization, RARE, what is the point of contribution as far as RARE is concerned, and what are you going to talk about?
Well, RARE is a global conservation organization. We've worked in about 60 different developing countries all over the world, and we really do one thing. We work to identify what's working, where local communities have unleashed their own self-interest in the process protected nature, and we call those bright spots. We then take those bright spots and we try to figure out how to help other communities adopt them. So essentially we look for what's already working and then work to spread it to other areas that can benefit from those kinds of solutions.
For our viewers, can you first of all explain what bright spots are?
Yeah, we love talking about bright spots. When we look at the conservation field over the last 25 years, so much of the focus has been on problems. In fact, at RARE we call it problemology, and it's this whole field of study that identifies problems. It's pretty easy to grab headlines when you can talk about just how bad the problem is, the rate of deforestation or the loss of fisheries or the change in CO2 in the air. What so few groups spend their time talking about, though, are the many solutions that are available in conservation. There's so much good news out there, it just doesn't sell newspapers. So we want to move the field from a standpoint of problemology to one of solutionology. And I'm not really sure either of those words exist, except perhaps within the halls of RARE, but hopefully they'll become more common through this idea of bright spots. So a bright spot is something that is extraordinary, some little bright spot of hope that can be codified, it can be replicated, it comes with a minimum recipe that someone else can follow. And we see great power in identifying conservation bright spots, whether it's in fisheries or forestry or climate adaptation, and simply letting other people take advantage of what already works somewhere.
Interesting. So let's talk about the success stories. But before that, I'd ask you, what is the mechanism? What do you take up, and how does it translate into the benefits, the real benefits?
Well, so an early bright spot in RARE's history was the St. Lucian parrot, and many people now know this story, but the St. Lucian parrot in the early 1980s was on the brink of extinction. It was the kind of problem that you hear about every day now. There were less than 100 species in the wild, and this was an endemic sort of national symbol of a small island in the western Indies, in the Caribbean. One young man, Paul Butler, working with the government of St. Lucia, created a groundswell of public support using commercial marketing tactics, billboards and bumper stickers, posters, and literally changed the fate of that bird by making it a cause célèbre for the entire nation. You jump ahead 25 years, there's more than 1,800 in the wild, it's on the passport, and it's a symbol of pride of that country. So the bright spot there isn't necessarily saving the bird, the bright spot is a way of galvanizing public support that creates national pride in the environment and fuels conservation. So that bright spot we call a pride campaign. We've now replicated that bright spot in 57 nations, 260 times all over the world. So that's sort of the early bright spot in RARE's history. There's another bright spot that I'm really excited about now, and this is something we've learned from especially a number of small coastal communities in Southeast Asia, countries like the Philippines, or one case in New Zealand, a couple others in Indonesia, where the combination of allocating rights, local political leaders can allocate guaranteed access rights, a guaranteed privilege to local communities in exchange for setting up what are called fish refuges or fish banks or no-take zones. The combination of allocating rights gives local fishers a self-interest in protecting those refuges where fish populations are able to increase dramatically. So we did a global search last year, a search for bright spots. we called it Solution Search. And in 6 weeks, we identified 103 promising local solutions from 48 countries. So there's lots of them out there. More than 30% of those nearshore coastal success stories were a combination of refuges and rights, privileges for local fishers. So we decided that's a bright spot worth replicating. So now we envision helping local communities, local politicians, local fisher cooperatives adopt that same bright spot, and we hope to scale it all over the world in partnership with NGOs and governments, multilaterals, bilaterals, and we're calling that Fish Forever. And we're creating a partnership to replicate that bright spot.
So, as much as I understand, there would be bright spot principles that you are trying to implement everywhere. So if these are principles, then it can be implemented in any other part of the world as well as in any other sector or domain or segment, right?
That's correct. One of the challenges of replicating a success story is that for the most part, successes come from some entrepreneur in some site who's creative, willing to work hard, and they end up with lots of implicit knowledge. But practitioners don't usually sit down and write out the recipe. Here's how this worked. Even Jack Welch, the famous CEO for 20 years of GE, had to hire someone and eventually marry the person who wrote down all that he learned that was then called the GE way. Well, practitioners in conservation, there's very creative people out there, very few of them write down the recipe. And so the question is, how do you take that implicit knowledge and make it explicit? Well, there's actually an art to finding what we call the minimum critical specification, or what is better described as the cheapest recipe to get the same result. It's that art that we all need to get better at in conservation if we're going to take these bright spots and make them replicable, adaptable in lots of other places. But one other thing I want to say about bright spots is, having worked and run an organization that's worked in 57 countries, everywhere we go, new area, new community, new country, we're told, well, just because it worked in Mexico or the Philippines or Indonesia, or just because it worked in St. Lucia, it doesn't mean it's going to work here. It's not going to work here. And we say it at the same time, the same way in every situation. We understand this is not a cookie cutter approach. What works elsewhere can influence what's going to work here, but it's basically just the inspiration to try something that has worked somewhere else. So bright spots not just about a recipe. Bright spots are really about the hope that gets people over that initial hurdle to help them believe change can happen. Because I think right now, just walking around the COP, everyone's worried about how much money is out there to meet the Aichi targets. Is there enough money? There's not enough money. There's never going to be enough money. But human beings have a population problem for two reasons. We do self-interest very well, and when the chips are down, we cooperate very effectively. That's why we're such a successful species. Conservation has to be messaged such that it's in people's best interest, and we need to find ways to cooperate. And I think that's the power of thinking about finding what's already worked and replicating it.
So what's up next on the cards?
Well, for RARE, what's up next is continuing to identify these promising opportunities that have already been proven effective, number one, and then really working on the infrastructure, the various kinds of infrastructure, whether it's networks and virtual networks or global training programs and systems or online capacity building efforts to diffuse and disseminate the proven programs, the proven approaches that have already been effective. So it's really about how do you take what works and get it to the right person at the right time so they can apply those lessons at their sites. I think what that means from a UN perspective, from a COP perspective, is we have to go beyond writing those slick little manuals that are a case study of 20 different good projects, and really move much more towards, here's the process you need to follow Add your own ingredients, add a little extra salt or butter or pepper or curry, what have you. But here's the basic process that's going to get you to the kind of result you envision. I think that would make a big difference.